Once upon a dream, happily ever after. Princess Aurora Rose woke, suffocating in heavy corseted gowns she had worn when she would go right to work, but was surprised by her own skin. I was older in the dream, she said aloud, surprised by her own voice. Several years had passed with Maleficent. Here she was still 16. She swung her uninjured younger legs around to the side of the bed, where Philip was stretching and yawning. Wake up, Prince, she said, clapping her shoulder. We have a lot to do. Their moment of peace and transition ended quickly. Screams, uneventful but still shocking, began to ring out from different areas of the castle. Some people were not waking up. Some people were as dead as they had been in the dream. 3 tiny creatures, red, blue, and green, buzzed into the room rapidly. Became familiar, very welcome little ladies. Aunts! Aurora Rose cried, surprised by how glad she was to see them, the rush of feeling that overcame her, despite their betrayal mere hours before in this world. She leapt up and gathered them in her arms, squeezing tightly. Rose! Fauna cried happily. They all had tears in their eyes, even Merryweather. But still. We, Aurora Rose whispered in Flora's ear, will talk later. Oh, yes, of course, my dear, but my lady! One of the faster, smarter guards, Aurora Rose made a mental note to review him later, with a possible eye to promotion, appeared to the door, face haggard and aghast. The king and queen, your parents, are dead, murdered, as well as countless other nobles and servants, and here, he added a little unsure of himself. None of the others who had slept had the advantage of knowing the full story of Maleficent's true intentions, and the point of the dream. Doubtless they would be confused and terrified. Thank you, she said politely. Sadly, I am already aware of the situation. This is all the result of the evil that Maleficent wrought. Philip was finally upright, still stretching and grim with the loose ends of the adventure. The guard's eyes kept flicking to the princes. I need you to take as many guards as you can and scour the castle for any remaining of Maleficent's servants, Aurora Rose said. Kill them all. Afterwards, you need to send a unit to go to her lair and destroy it utterly. Set fire to it and all of its contents. I don't want a repeat of recent events. We must make sure that every aspect of her is dead and gone. Absolutely, my lady, the guard said. He looked relieved and someone was taking charge of the situation, but hesitant about carrying out these orders. Perhaps Prince Philip or your cousin, the Prince of Fondel, can both help out with the search, Aurora Rose said, putting some spit into her words. She changed her mind about his promotion. If they are up to it, all able-bodied men with swords are welcome to do so, nay, encouraged. She moved purposely out of the room, still with the infinite grace she had been born with, but there was iron immobility in her shoulders. Fauna sighed. Already a queen, that one. The 3 fairies and Philip hurried after her. In the real world, she had been in the castle as an adult for only a few hours, but it was, with some superficial differences, nearly exactly the same as the Thorn Castle. She had no trouble finding the throne room. If nothing else, the sounds of chaos would have led her there. For just a few moments, Aurora Rose caught herself, viewing the room she had destroyed just moments earlier in her mind. The real one was different in ways that made her queasy. Lengths and heights of things were changed, colors and decorations were off. It was set as if for a party. My wedding, Aurora Rose realized blatantly. She stood halfway down the grand staircase. She was supposed to have descended with Philip, her arm in his, to greet their parents. Gold and blue tapestries hung everywhere. Shiny horns with pennants hanging from their bells flashed in the light. But this was not the scene the musicians had prepared themselves for. Beautifully dressed ladies dragged their priceless gowns through pools of blood and wept. Men tried to comfort them or each other, or they themselves wept. Bodies sprawled on chairs and the floor in terrible poses. People, Aurora Rose shouted, trying to channel King Hubert's lusty call from the dream world. Only a few looked at her. One, however, was a horn player. Aurora Rose impatiently gestured at him. He complied immediately. Like the guard before, he was only too happy to have someone giving orders. He played a loud royalish flourish, and could perhaps be forgiven if it wasn't perfect. At that, the crowd turned around. Strange noises, murmurs of recognition and astonishment, rose from them. They remembered her from their dreams. They remembered the battle, her facing off against the dragon. Noble ladies and honored gentlemen, Aurora Rose said as demurely as shouting would allow, it is a sad day for our kingdom. My heart goes out to all we have lost, and those who loved them. I know that no words of mine can stem your grief. Even so, there is much work to do. Those who aren't in need of immediate assistance, please return to the rooms in which you are staying. Our servants will care for your every need, and we will send for you all as soon as things are tidied. There were a few mumbles of protest, but otherwise everyone who could leave seemed glad to do so. No one went alone. All were in little groups, whispering and discussing and sharing what they remembered, the strange experience they had all endured while asleep. A man in severe black robes and soft hat strode over to Aurora Rose. Other men in similar robes followed behind them. They all wore thick golden chains with heavy gemmed pendants on them. Ministers or secretaries or some such, Aurora Rose decided, like the ones who had yelled at her in her dream within the dream. It seemed that sometimes sleep did indeed mirror life. Your Highness, it is very good of you to take this order under your own personal direction, the first man began. But as you are new to the kingdom and have no experience with such matters, and are a woman, moreover, another man put in. And a woman, the first man continued. Your delicate constitution may not even survive the viewing of your parents, much less what else needs to be done. What I'm saying is perhaps you should leave the sorting out of things to us, your father's advisors, and maybe your uncle Prince Jondry. Aurora Rose regarded him mildly, trying to conjure memories of the beautiful girl full of grace everyone was supposed to fall in love with so easily. Did I not face down a dragon unharmed while the rest of you fled to the protection of the woods? The man blanched. I haven't Oh, yes, you remember it well. Please do not pretend it wasn't real, Aurora Rose said firmly, trying not to hiss the way Maleficent would have. After such an ordeal, believe me, I am quite capable of taking over civic matters. If you have some disagreement with my manner of doing things, you may, of course, bring it up later in conference with me, privately. Also, from here on out, you will address me as correctly as Your Majesty. Yes, Your Majesty, the man said nervously, glancing at the men around him. None would meet his eyes. Excellent, Aurora Rose said. Thank you. I look forward to meeting all of you later to discuss how to proceed. She strode forward out of the knot of men, Philip and the fairies trailing smartly like an entourage. The prince was trying very hard not to smile. It took her a long time to make the short journey to the thrones. Noblemen and women, who had looked so alike and unreal in their perfect dresses and matching raiment in the other world, became human through tragedy in this one. It took her a moment to recognize Duke Walter of the Five Trees, the short, sensible, middle-aged husband of Lady Astrid. The princess had never had much to do with him in the Thorn Castle, only his wife. His cheeks were wet and red, and he held Lady Astrid's head in his lap, refusing to let anyone take her away. Aurora Rose knelt and clasped his hand. I'm so sorry, she whispered. He nodded, not really paying attention. Even a brave princess who fought dragons and saved everyone, including him, couldn't distract his attention from his loss and grief. She steeled herself and moved on. The young, powerful, and now dead Marquis and Marchioness of Longbow had left behind 3 children, the oldest of whom was 12. He tried to look brave, but hysteria leaked from the edges of his eyes with tears. Maleficent hasn't paid enough for her crimes, Aurora Rose murmured, after she kissed and hugged each of the children, unable to do anything else for them in the moment. Finally, she came to her own tragedy. The bloody and lifeless bodies of King Stephen and Queen Leah still propped up on their thrones. No one had dared to touch them. No one knew what the protocol was. Aurora Rose leaned over and looked into their faces, but the dead told no secrets. I forgive you, she whispered, because there was nothing else she could do. She kissed each one on the forehead, then summoned a servant to cover them and take them away. King Hubert had apparently fallen asleep near the royal couple, having been in discussion with them as they waited for Aurora's arrival. His face was sopping wet with tears, but now he was talking to a guard, to a servant, to a dazed-looking noble, to anyone at all who would listen. Years I lived in the wilderness after that blasted fairy exiled me. Years. Once I ate some mushrooms out of extreme hunger. Didn't know what they were, but they didn't kill King Hubert. No, I tell you. Takes more than that to take me out. Hey, Philip, my boy! His eyes lit up when he noticed the couple. I was just telling this lad here. One of my many Israelites I was leading through the wilderness. Like Moses I was, eh, boy? Absolutely, father. Say, I don't suppose your mother came back with the rest of us, did she? He asked eagerly, looking around the room. She was lost somewhere, too, but maybe she came back? The prince looked searchingly into his dad's face. Something was broken in the old man. Roaming the forests of the dream world by himself for years had indeed altered him, just as he had suggested. Philip wrapped his father in a tight embrace. Aurora Rose saw for just a moment, tears quicken in Philip's eyes before he screwed them shut and willed them away. He sobbed a huge, shuddering sob of loss for all the things he had endured but didn't name. The dream world had changed everyone, even the boyish, unflappable Philip. But what's wrong, lad? King Philip asked in wonder. We're all right now. Father. But whatever he was about to say next was interrupted by someone calling desperately from across the room. My lady! The guard Aurora Rose had sent off to organize the search for Maleficent's servants came running back to her, looking a little pale despite his exertion. We found something that might be the remains of Maleficent or the dragon, he asked unsteadily. Aurora Rose set her shoulders, feeling grim. Show me, she ordered. She and Philip and the three fairies hurried after him, picking up a half-dozen of the more quick-witted guards as an escort. Back through the chaotic throne room, past the tables in the great hall, out to the courtyard, and then through the gate, over the drawbridge like it was no big deal, the princess tried to keep from gawking. She was just walking out of the castle, and she seemed to be trapped in for so many years. And the thorns in this one, receding now, were small and pretty and covered in flowers. On the other side of the outer walls, bushes and fields still smoldered from Philip's battle with the dragon. A blackened, streaming crater outlined there the dragon had fallen. Philip's sword was still there, pinning the tattered remains of Maleficent's capes and robes to the earth. But instead of Maleficent lying among them, it was Lyanna. In this realm she was more pig monster than human, though she still had her beautiful black hair and wore the vestments of a lady. Tusks protrude from her mouth awkward angles, and her delicate hands ended in strange claws. She looked over at Aurora Rose without moving her head and smiled faintly. You're still alive, Aurora Rose said, kneeling beside her. Lyanna gave a painful snort. I was never alive, in this world or the other. I'm just a piece of Maleficent and some dark magic. Semantics. I'm dying now, or a reasonable version of thereof, and the last of Maleficent dies with me. Aurora Rose took Lyanna's hand claws in her own hands and squeezed them. Why did you save me? You were my friend, the creature said simply. Aurora Rose felt the tears well up more than the day could hold. Lyanna's eyes turned toward the sky as if she didn't want to see. I learned that you can care for someone and be cared for by someone, even if you're not created with that as part of you. You can learn that. Maleficent could have learned that too, but she never did. Things could have been so different. Her breathing was ragged now and growing shallow, the sound made worse by the tusks. She shifted uncomfortably. Biting back a sob, Aurora Rose gestured to Philip. Without needing to ask, he ripped off his cloak and handed it to her. The princess folded up the cloth and placed it as best as she could under the girl's head, tucking it under her neck. A look of relief spread over the creature's face. Thank you for this and everything. And then, just like that, her eyes grew filmy and still. Aurora Rose let out one desperate cry, a shriek of helplessness, anger, and loss. Philip put his arms around her and held her tightly. Look, he murmured. Lyanna's face began to shift and melt. Her whole body did. But instead of dissolving into the black, hissing soot and filth the demons usually became, her features transformed. Lying dead on the floor before them wasn't a pig thing. It was a young woman with a beautiful long black hair and high cheekbones, and black horns sprouting from her skull. A tiny, pleasant smile sat on her lips, a look of peace. It's Maleficent, Aurora Rose whispered, as she was originally, as she should have been. Philip shook his head and swore, kicking the dirt in frustration. This, he murmured, this is our happy ending?